Another week, United Rugby Championships. Zalem Nell, SA Rugby Mag editor, joins me. And a special guest, as always, Scott Gibbs, the legendary St. Helens. St. Helens as well, but Welsh and British and Irish Lions midfield master and a regular on SA Rugby during the Lions series. Hope to have him here during the 3-test series against Wales. Scott, welcome from Wales. And do we even have to talk about the Welsh URC challenge at the moment? Is it going to get better this weekend?
Well, it has been mightily disappointing, really, isn't it, for all of the regions visiting the Republic. So I guess the Ospreys will dust themselves off and look to try and put a performance this weekend in Cape Town, just to find or galvanise some confidence, because I think across the board all regions have performed poorly to any stretch of the imagination. So they've been outplayed, they've been outmuscled, they've been just outdone.
You see, if you we'll get to you now, Zals. If you look at the URC and how it started, South African teams went overseas without their current internationals, but that was a bit skewed because we don't actually have current internationals playing in the URC. We've got 6 of the 23 that played against England are playing URC for SA teams, and one France Stanley's playing in the Currie Cup. So we struggled though going abroad. We struggled when we were in Wales. We struggled in Scotland and also in Ireland. But it wasn't by outside of the Leicester Bulls game where they pounded them. They were quite competitive matches. Are you surprised at the lack of competitiveness that we've seen from the Welsh teams coming here?
I think that's a fair observation from wherever vantage point you look. For me, South Africa has always been the best place to go and tour. So whilst these little vignettes of tours from all of the regions, it's always exciting to be there. But the stark reality is that you're up against a different beast on their home ground, and we've seen some majestic performances, let's be honest, from the Bulls and the Sharks, and also some great football by the Stormers. So they are clearly reveling now that the dust has settled on the URC, and the stark reality is that the top 8 in the URC are all the usual suspects that you expect up there, and a very disappointing show in the second half of the log table by the Welsh.
Scott, for the local blokes who don't really understand the dynamics of Welsh rugby, can you give some insight into what are some of the challenges that those Wales teams face, and the impact of the regional system versus the club system? How does it all stick together there?
Well, I think it's a little bit more complex and nuanced in the context that we are kind of nearly in 20 years of what was the dissemination of club rugby in Wales, where 12 professional clubs, unsustainable as they were amalgamated into 4 regions. Has that been a successful exploration over the last 2 decades? I'm not really sure. And where do we go from here? It's very hard to say. But I think the macro picture, we need to look a little bit deeper and have a deeper dive into the socio-economic challenges that Wales have seen. And that is not only just because of the pandemic. We have to go back to the Great Recession and beyond, where some of the junior clubs, which have always been good, strong feeder clubs to the Premier clubs and to the regions, have been decimated. And I'm not too sure, and it's not a bold statement, but I get the feeling there's less and less activity and participation going on now than there has been over the last 50 years. But I think maybe by the time we get to the summer tour, I'll do some research and have a deeper dive, and we'll get a greater picture as to what is the current state of Welsh rugby and what is the hope going forward. Because we always like to see a very, very competitive national side, but it has to be underpinned by a very strong and fervent domestic offering.
And also the ability to go away from home, because you also don't want a competition where the sides, and I think that's been one of the challenges for the South African sides, is to say, so you guarantee your 6-7 home games, you've got to be able to go away and have a chance of winning 2 or 3, and not basically give those ones away on the road. But the old French mentality where they play at home, they beat you by 40, they go away from home next door and they lose by 40 because they send the B team. Having an influx of foreign players there seem to change that mindset. If you look at the South African teams and the way they've responded, 11 wins out of 12, and then Edinburgh obviously doing the Sharks in weather that looked like it was in the heart of Edinburgh's winter. I think the Sharks are more shocked than Edinburgh in that in Durban last weekend. What have you made of the improvements of the South African sides, looking at how they played earlier in the tournament? And would you say it's exclusively down to home ground advantage, or you have seen some involvement in each respective team?
For me, there's 2 issues: youth and movement. There seems to be a lot of speed across the ground, which is great. And for me, as an outside back, I like the fact that the perimeter is being stretched. So we are seeing some inimitable brilliance from all of those home provinces in South Africa that are starting to feel their feet and bring this confidence to the URC. So that all bodes well for obviously their sophomore season or next year, when we kind of get to understand what is the nuts and bolts of this competition, because I think it has all the hallmarks of really challenging up there with some of the great domestic competitions. The Gallagher Premiership obviously is very solid, and it's a great product offering, not only from a broadcasting perspective, but also boots on the ground. So, I think the early signs are very, very encouraging, and certainly, as time moves forward in South Africa and we get to see more of a crowd and a more, crowd participation, we're going to start, relishing it even more.
Well, this week's offering kicks off with the Sharks and Dragons in Durban on Friday night. The Dragons have got 3 Welsh internationals back, Ross Moriarty, one of them. But I think they've won 1 out of 11 matches this year. Is it going to be more pain for Dragons, or do you see there any chance of some sort of an upset in Derbs?
No, I again, listen, I mean, the word pain is often, it often comes in the sentence when you're playing rugby in South Africa. I dare say it will be. Obviously, Will Rowlands, who didn't play against Italy because of the Alan Wynne-Jones 150th cap issue, so he gets a good run out. I mean, listen, that back row will be boasted, and the back 5 will be boasted by those 2 inclusions. But I think the biggest challenge for the Welsh regions in South Africa is playing football. Actually, let's see some all court game, because they're clearly coming up against a very stern defense and a very excited attack. And, you have to be a special animal to come down there and really focus on, in their backyard, playing some smash mouth rugby. I just don't think they have the constituent elements to do that.
I also think, Scott, if we go back to the original draw of the URC, and we keep on re-emphasizing this, is who'd want to be a new tournament organizer during the pandemic,
sure,
during COVID, then it was stop-start. When we look at the draw, and we've said this consistently, next year will be a clearer barometer of where everyone is positioned. There will be that fluidity in the scheduling, and I think a lot of the Welsh and the Irish and Scottish and Italian sides would have loved coming to South Africa in the latter part of December,
sure,
to play on the harder grounds, to kind of play in sunshine as well, where if you look at the conditions in Durban, and we saw this in the many years of Super Rugby, when the Sharks started their campaign at home, February, March, they invariably with 3 down after 4 games, they go to Australia, New Zealand and come back with 3 wins on tour. Yeah. So it's not an easy place to play, with that humidity, with that ball in March, April. And then from there you go to the high file potentially the next week, and you're playing, while it's still cold, you're playing on this barren field. So as much as we have to adjust to that side, I think there's a lot of adjustment for the young Welsh players, Scottish players, not so much the Irish ones, because they've got a very settled top 2 teams, to come to South Africa.
Well, that's right, and I think if you look at the Leinster and the Munster and the Ulster triumphant, they're very settled organisations. They got a very good system. and they've been consistently coached well. Ally that to their access to players and when international players can come in and fit out, but also because of the depth of the squads, that they will travel with lots of confidence and also be adaptable in any conditions and play in any sort of game. Whereas I think because of the economies of scale to some degree with the Welsh regions is that the squads are not as strong. When they lose international players, it really upsets the rhythm and momentum. And again, I think it's their own adaptability within a rugby structure in their own systems to find their own voice. And I think that's something that they have struggled with, because we know of old that the Scarlets have an inimitable brand. That when it plays well, it's very attractive to watch, and they can be very stubborn in defence also. I still think that the Ospreys are in a kind of transitionary period because they again have been decimated with injuries. They have still some experience yet to come back into the side. They can still do a shift. But I think maybe they're still in a rebuild type of framework as well. And, the Dragons, unfortunately, have been kind of perennial kind of underdogs because they can put up a stern effort, but just haven't got the out and out class to finish off teams.
But if you look at the odds, and Money Man Kev, who's in Barcelona at the moment, he was in Paris earlier this week. If you go to the SA Rugby and the Money Man Facebook sites and the social media sites, you'll see his clips. He's giving you 25 seconds of his insights into who's going to win and how you're going to make your money. It's 24.5 points is the handicap for the Dragons, and he says 30 plus. They'll cover that spread. I don't think it's going to be as convincing for the Sharks. That's my personal opinion. If I look at all their games at home, the first one up against the Scarlets, they were in trouble for 40 minutes. Zebra, they were poor, but they got the 30-point win, and they were just diabolical against Edinburgh. So I have them to win, Zels, but I don't have them to win emphatically.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Mark. I mean, last week they didn't really show up, and this week they've benched the Springbok captain and Sikambuzo Norche. That's two Boks they've moved to the bench in response to a very poor performance. They're putting all their eggs in the Kerwin Bosch basket. I don't really see it paying off. I expect them to beat the Dragons, but like you said, I don't think the margin is going to be as big as some expect.
Well, I think, listen, the weather has to be settled for the Sharks to kind of perform. The Dragons are a gnarly team. There's no doubt. They're difficult to play, but quite easy to break down. But you've got to endure that for an hour. You've got to do the grind. You've got to play the short game down the middle 30, and then you can stretch them in the last quarter. And I think if that's the coaching sentiment, then clearly that 24 points can be achieved. But they have to be disciplined, and it has to be a low error game.
If you look at, I'm just going to go through as the South African teams are playing. The Lions at home against Edinburgh. Now, Edinburgh pre the win against the Sharks had two wins out of 7 on the road. Very different side playing at home, two kind of going away. Do you see the confidence from that victory? I see the bookies have got them favourites to beat the Lions, but the Lions seem to be on a bit of a momentum roll at the moment and playing with a hell of a lot of confidence in dry conditions. At altitude. Where's your sentiment for this one, Scotty?
Yeah, I think, listen, it wasn't a polished performance by the Lions last week. And I mean, where I'm not saying that the Lions are the vagabonds of the South African franchises, because to me, there's not so many familiar faces, but there's a lot of talent there, a lot of raw talent that can be harnessed. What are they? Three wins on the bounce now. So in Johannesburg, especially after disseminating and breaking down that Edinburgh victory last week against the Sharks, they'll be super confident to take the spoils in Joburg.
I've actually got Edinburgh to win this one. I think they've got a superior goal kicker in Bofeli. They're a team that holds on to possession for long phases. I know the Lions are bringing themselves back on defence, but they don't really have an established reputation there yet, and I think Edinburgh is going to hold on to the pull for a long time and punish the Lions for penalties. And I feel like the visitors might win this one.
Will they win it, or they might?
They will win it.
All right, so he's got his kilt on today.
There we go.
All right, and then the one in Cape Town, it's our lads, the Stormers up against the Ospreys. Now, traditionally, you would have said that would be a cracker of a game. If you look at the history of the Ospreys and that, do you see them being competitive, Scott, or even coming close to boxing a win, given what you saw last week?
Listen, I think they will rally for sure, because they'll want to end their trip on a high, and certainly leave Cape Town in a better space. There's definitely a lot of talent in that squad, and I think maybe, it'll be down to the mindset from a Stormers perspective, because if the Stormers get a little bit complacent, they kind of, they'll have a deep dive into the Ospreys and think, oh, we can whack these guys and start loose and wide. It could turn out very horrible for them. So I think another disciplined performance. You got to start the game tight and earn the right to kind of bring width into it. But I think there's too much talent on that Stormers side for the Ospreys to really trouble them. And you can see in the body language last week that the second half, their heads dipped in the Ospreys. They put up a fight, but I just think that they lack the raw talent that the Stormers have in abundance.
Again, I look at 19.5 spread. Handicap is massive. I mean, for the Stormers to win by 20 plus against the Ospreys at home would be, I think they'd have to play particularly well, and the Ospreys would have to have been in the pub all week, with Mavericks all week in Cape Town, which is always a possibility.
Which is always a possibility.
So yeah, I think they've been very generous. I'm expecting a really good game. I think the Stormers too strong as well.
Yeah.
At home. Away from home would be a very different story.
Yeah.
I think if we were playing these games in Wales this weekend, I don't think we'd be as confident or as cock-a-hoop.
Yeah.
But I think a South African win there as well. And then which brings us down to the last one in South Africa, and a very interesting thing, unbeknownst to the CEO, but he endorsed it. Jake went on radio, and because we've got 50% capacity crowds back here, the capacity for Saturday could be 25,000 at the ground, and he unilaterally decided that the cost of a ticket would be 25 rand, just over a pound, I think £1.50, and less than a cappuccino. And he said if that doesn't get 25,000 people to watch them play Ulster, they may as well pack it in. And the union has endorsed it. The CEO has said, who's he to argue with the head of marketing? And so I think we could have a 2:00 kickoff in Pretoria with Ulster playing the Bulls in front of 25,000 people, and that should make for
fabulous
one cracking game.
Well, there's no better followed province in South Africa than the Blue Bulls. So I think that'll be the pick of the weekend. From a sternest competition, both sides kind of equally matched. But I still fancy that the South African teams this weekend will do a clean sweep and further solidify the reason why the URC is so important for the growth of rugby in South Africa, and also for us here in the Celtic nations.
All right, so I've got a 4 from 4 for South African team. You got a 4 from 4, Scotty, and Zels with his Kilton has got a 3 from 4 and giving it to Edinburgh.
Going with the bagpipes, Edinburgh, but I think the rest of the South African teams win.
Edinburgh on their first trip do the double. Unbelievable. Then looking just at the two local ones, the Scarlets and Cardiff Blues, and then Munster Leinster. I mean, that's the Munster Leinster one is the pick of the weekend. But Scarlets, Cardiff, both coming back from indifferent tours. Where's your money going there?
Well, I think Cardiff last weekend, they impressed with their resilience to bounce back and really put a shift on in that second half, and actually played some decent football. So I think they'll be riding high, on that basis. The Scarlets obviously had a long journey back from South Africa via Italy. There'll be some tired bodies, and whilst there's some new faces in that Scarlets team, I just think that the Cardiff Blues at the moment will relish this opportunity just to further solidify a nail in the coffin that, they're maybe on the bounce back from a regional perspective and will look to take the spoils.
If you also just looking at the scheduling, Scotty, I mean, it was 40 odd degrees or close to it in Cape Town in an afternoon, and the poor boys from Cardiff taking a beating. And then I found out they flew out on Sunday evening, so they didn't even get to spend Sunday evening at Caprice having a few cold ones, enjoying the hospitality. And that's obviously something you'd want to see as this tournament grows, that young players from the Celtic nations start loving the experience of coming to South Africa, being based in Durban or Cape Town, seeing the Highveld, crowds back, getting that experience of playing something that which is totally different to what they get up north.
I couldn't agree more, Mark. I think that's one of the delicious elements of touring South Africa is the ability to do that, whether Joburg, Pretoria, Durban, PE or Bloemfontein, but certainly in the Western Cape and Cape Town, especially because, I know the great hospitality. So it gives you enormous confidence and knowledge as you go forward in a rugby play and shapes you, texturally. And then they'll end up start looking forward to these annual trips, and maybe they'll be a biannually. I don't know, but it's one of the key aspects of sharing the love in rugby.
Then also looking, Scotty, at the 3-test series against Wales. Given that there's 20-odd South Africans in the squad of 30 that are playing overseas, have you seen enough from the South African sides to think that this is a series to blood some new youngsters and not be totally dependent on the 2019 and 2021 Lions Series winners and the World Cup winners, to say this is your really last chance for proper prep going to the World Cup? Is there enough that you've seen to say they could put a very competitive team out with a greater emphasis on local-based players?
It's an interesting aspect that you bring up there, Mark, because I'm thinking the same for Wales. If I was Pivac or Rassi or Jack at the moment, I'd be saying, listen, maybe we need to start thinking what a rebuild looks like, because we can't carry on this legacy from Japan for 4 years hence, because there's clearly an array of talent that we need to blood. And how do we do that? Let's free up some spaces. And the same adage goes for my own sentiment with, if you look at Alan Wynne, George North, Tipperick, all of them have had difficult year with injuries and so on. Maybe it's time to just say, listen, rest, take the off season to rest. Let's free up some space to see what talent that we have coming forward. And I think that may make for an even more interesting test series, that both sides have new faces, new identities, and maybe we can blood some new rugby patterns that'll be a little bit more excited, rather than maybe going up against a very robust selection that will be familiar to South Africa. And with Wales then trying to bring all of their kind of injured guys who haven't had much game time into a test series, because whilst it is a significant test series, it probably has no bearing on how you prepare going forward with France 2023 around the corner. So I'd like to think that the sentiment from both camps would be, let's see some new faces. Let's freshen it up a little.
Right. I want to ask you one last question before we let you go and enjoy the pleasures of being back with the family and being on the coast. You've seen enough of the Boks from 2019. You were here for the early part of the Lions series. You watch them intently, end of the year tour. Is that World Cup winning side and Lions Series side in desperate need of a youthful injection looking at the 2023 World Cup?
I think on balance, this is progress. We're talking, even if we talk a year out to the Lions, and then we talk another 18 months out, is that Japan 2019 was a long time ago, and you can't rest on your laurels, and neither can the coaching and the management. And you have to keep realizing that freshness in personality and freshness in attitude is a key component to being a strong contender, not only this summer, but putting a marker in the ground for the next World Cup. So let's not see the cast of usual suspects. Let's see some fresh faces, some youthful exuberance, because that will always come with speed, pace, power, and I think more so what I've seen on offer at the moment, that the incumbents are incredibly. There's a lot more skill that I see on the periphery now that's there to be chosen. So a lot of hands will be up, and it's whether the management kind of stick to the old tried and tested, because it's quite formulaic. We're not going to change the way that we play. But sometimes you just have to freshen up. And I think the pivot needs to happen for South Africa if they want to retain their World Cup status.
Thanks, Scotty. Have fun. Zels, thanks for coming in. If you want to get your individual picks, go onto the SA Rugby, the Keo, the Moneyman Facebook pages, the Twitter feeds, the Insta accounts. You will see Moneyman, who's touring Europe at the moment. He's giving you his insights within 25 seconds. He's telling you where to put your money, but he's also saying don't come looking for him if it gets wasted. Thanks, Scotty. It's been wonderful. We'll chat next week.
Cheers, Scott.